Welcome, my friends, to Sanctuary Online on this March 23rd, our final night of our 2021 Lenten journey. My name is Jo Bell, and I'm your host this evening. And once again, I'm deeply honored to welcome you all to Sanctuary Online. Those of you who are regulars, of course, those of you who become regulars during March, during our Lenten journey. And also we want to offer a special welcome to any of those who are joining us for the first time tonight. During the first 4 Tuesdays of March, we've been running a pilot of sorts, and we've called it a test, or better, a taste of our more rigorous 18-session curriculum called Creating a Life That Matters. And until this month, CLM, what we call Creating a Life That Matters, has been taught in a sit down in one room kind of setting. And during March, we designed 4 of those 18 sessions of our Sanctuary Online Lenten journey, and we've called it A Taste of Self. So thank you for being here tonight. Just a little bit of us. Sanctuary Online is an extension of our home and the nonprofit retreat center, Sanctuary in the Woods, that we're building just east of Austin, Texas. And because one of our driving values is to create and nourish community, no matter where we are as Sanctuary, tonight we'd encourage each of you to keep your cameras on, choose for gallery view so you can see everyone, not just the speaker. And also, if you wouldn't mind to open your chat box and type in your email and your cell phone, especially if you haven't registered for us tonight. That way we can put your contact information in our database, and we'll send you an occasional email letting you know what's happening at Sanctuary and Sanctuary Online. Now, by now, most of you are aware that we've taken these 4 sessions out of the middle of this larger CLM curriculum. And because we've got a few folks on tonight who may not be aware of what CLM is, I'll give me a little 30,000 foot view. So it was in January of 2005 that a few of us joined together in Toronto to write what we now know to be a life-changing conversational journey experienced in community. And it's been walked by thousands of people in multiple countries thus far. So CLM is a curriculum, and it's comprised of 3 courses. So normally, before attending these 4 sessions we've been walking you through this month, you'd have attended 6 sessions of the first course, which is called Rediscovering Relationship with the Sacred. Then these 4 courses were taken right out of the middle of the second course, which is Rediscovering Relationship with the Self. And after this, you would then move on to the 3rd course in the curriculum, which is called Rediscovering Relationship with My Passion. And before I move too much further, I would love to introduce our team to you. And I will do that by sharing my screen quickly. And I'll just say I was blessed to kick us off the first week with a session called Brilliant, Gorgeous, and Fabulous. We talked about our multidimensional selves, and we also learned about aligning our physical self, our emotional self, and our energetic self. And then Terry brought us up 2 weeks ago. Terry taught a course called Powerful Beyond Measure. And what she did there was talk about she shared her amazing story of her role with the Pulse nightclub, and how, Terry, you were there for such a time as this, right? And that course is called Powerful Beyond Measure. Last week, Lily, Brock, give it up. Come on, do some of these things, right? Lily, thank you so much. Last week, you took us on that journey under the waterline, and we learned how our behaviors well, I'm going to share this in a minute. It was just a great class, Lily. Thank you so very much. We got so many great texts from you and emails of feedback from people. So we know that class hit home, definitely. And tonight we're going to finish with Ken Martin teaching the course that is probably the most requested that we do even more of. And it's called Keeping Body and Soul Together, which it's got Ken's stamp all over it. You know, I often say this was Cheryl and I first met Ken on a ship in the middle of the ocean when he was asked to pinch hit as a preacher, and he preached this sermon that just moved Cheryl and I my goodness, in our core. And we're like, we got to meet that guy. And actually, that sermon is what tonight's class is rolled around. Keeping body and soul together. It's the reintegration. And it's important that I say reintegration, not integration, of our sexuality and our spirituality. And while these four faces are up front quite a bit, I want to say that the two people who are actually in charge, the behind the scenes team, Cheryl Meyer and Barb Crabtree, you guys can wave at everybody. These two make everything happen before, during, and after each session. So they are actually in charge. We're very clear on that. They're powerful members of our team. Barb is handling our email, our text communication, registrations, and Cheryl's become our breakout room diva, somehow getting all of you into small groups in the blink of an eye. And Cheryl's also a master facilitator of CLM, a member of our original design team. And Barb is also a certified facilitator, having been with us since 2009. So that's the team, and that's the whole deal. I do want to say though, let's do this. Let me give you the overview of how things will look tonight. So this is a welcome and gathering. Again, if you're just joining us, please make sure we've got your first and last name, email address, and cell number over there in the chat box. You've seen a few of us changing some names to make sure we're working out for our breakout room assignments. In a moment, I'm going to review the importance of water lines and how we're going to use those tonight, okay? Then we have our session goal, scripture and quote that frames each session that we do. The teaching, again, on reintegration of our sexuality and spirituality by Ken. We'll do our small and large group discussions and have that second teaching, kind of the same model you're used to now. And I'm going to offer a little bit of admin right here. We're going to close tonight a little bit differently. I'll share more about that later, but I want you to pay attention because we have to close this session. And then we're also going to close the entirety of our A Taste of Self journey. So I'll let you know what's happening in April there. And we will close session 4 as we normally do with our music and paper body activity. And then we're going to come back and close A Taste of Self. We still should be out of here inside the 90 minutes. So everything should look good in that realm. But we just want to make sure that you know ahead of time, we are going to change things up a little bit at the end of tonight. Okay. Now, what I want to say is that we intentionally teach water lines, iceberg people and water lines, right prior to this session on sexuality. And we do that with intention, okay? And so a little refresher for those of you who were here last week and a bit of a teach for those of you who weren't here last week. But Lily taught us about iceberg people and that behaviors are those things above the waterline. The things we can see and hear about a person. Underneath that, and it's really important that right underneath that water line there, that we can't see these things, are our thoughts, and a little bit deeper are our feelings. And this green arrow is just showing that our thoughts and feelings shape our behaviors. Underneath our thoughts and feelings are, again, a little bit deeper our priorities, and even a little deeper our values. And finally, way down deep is our needs. And these can be met needs that shape us or unmet needs. And what I want to be, you kind of work your way back up the iceberg that our unmet needs very often shape our priorities and values. Those shape our thoughts and feelings, and those shape our behaviors. And that's a wonderful model. I hope, we know a lot of you were struck by that last week, and we gave you some homework on that. What's important tonight, though, is this concept of water lines. So Lily showed you last week that you have a water line and that you can manage to lower that water line if you want, down below thoughts and feelings, and you can share your thoughts and feelings if you choose to. Lily also shared, and I'm sure a few of us know some people who keep their water line way up here. And it's a very cold kind of non-engaging affect. And tonight, as always with CLM, we kind of encourage you to drop your water line, not to where you're uncomfortable, but definitely to where you're participating and sharing in the conversation. We also want to make sure that you know that that water line is also there to not lower too quickly, especially when we're talking about things like sexuality and spirituality. So just reminding you tonight that you can manage that water line. And as we go into relationships, as you're talking in your small group, we'll share again in a moment, but you can share at the level that you feel comfortable, okay? And we really just want to be aware and careful that the concepts we often talk about in CLM can be quite deep, and they can open up us. And we want to make sure that you know the reason we teach water lines before we teach sexuality and spirituality is simply so that you remember, I have a water line and I'm in charge of it. I'm in charge of how deeply I share or how deeply I kind of keep myself buttoned up. And Lily gave us a great example for that last week. So with all of that little reminder, Cheryl, would you light our candle tonight for us, please, as we start our session? Thank you, honey. And then tonight, Eric, if you would open us up with our session goal.
By the end of this session, we will be committed to the reconciliation of body and soul, sexuality, and spirituality.
You got it. Thank you, my friend. Thanks, Eric. And Brandy, our session scripture, please.
You shaped me first inside, then out. You formed me in my mother's womb. I thank you, high God. You're breathtaking, body and soul. I am marvelously made. I worship in adoration. What a creation.
Thank you, Brandy. I appreciate that. And Peter, tonight, if you would share our session quote.
So many sweet flowers bore, and I saw it was filled with graves and tombstones where flowers should be. And priests in black gowns were walking their rounds and binding with briars my joys and desires. And that's from The Garden of Love by William Blake.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Well, tonight, my friends, you are in for a treat. As I said, many times when we've taught CLM, I don't care, we've taught it all over the world, teaching this class or teaching facilitators to facilitate this class, we've always said, we can't wait for the era when holograms are commonplace. And we would just poof, bring Ken Martin right into the classroom and offer that hologram in a teaching like only Ken can do. So tonight, something we've all been waiting for, any of us who've ever taken CLM, anyone who's ever taught CLM, Ken, we are just really honored that you're here, that you're feeling well enough to teach tonight. And my friend, they are yours.
Thank you, Joby. Welcome, everybody. A few years ago, I attended a Texas Faith Network conference in Houston, Texas. It was a conference to examine the problem of the rise of religious fundamentalism in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Dr. James Forbes was one of the speakers there, and he began his presentation by saying that the things he was going to tell us scared him a little. He said that even though he believed these things were true and that they were essential for us to be faithful at this moment in history, they frightened him a little bit. And the reason was because he was going to talk to us about the fact that God is at work in the world creating an interfaith coalition where different faiths would cooperate together. And he was going to tell us that God wanted us to stop emphasizing the differences between our faiths and wanted us to start emphasizing the similarities so that all of our faiths could work together and cooperate together. And he said the reason that kind of scared him, even as he said it, was because he felt like he was betraying his Black church tradition, because he grew up in the Black church where Christianity was always emphasized as superior to every other religion. And I kind of understand that tonight, because the things I'm going to share with you scare me a little bit sometimes. I was raised in Mississippi in the 1940s and 50s. Mine was a monolithically fundamentalist Southern Baptist home and culture. And believe me, we didn't talk about these things at home or at church or anywhere else. But I believe that these things are true. And I believe that these things are essential for us to be faithful in this moment we are living in history. So if you get a little bit uncomfortable talking about God and sex at the same time, I get it. But believing that this is really important, here we go. So when I was about 8 years old, an older boy who lived down the road from us very ceremoniously took me up into the hayloft of one of our neighbors' barns to explain to me in great detail where babies come from. And it was my total disbelief in everything that I heard that gave me the courage to go and ask my father how babies get here. And my father told me to go and ask Mr. Hannon, my Sunday school teacher, who, looking equally uncomfortable, sent me back to ask my father. And that was the beginning of evasion and misinformation and no information and mixed messages about sexuality, which by the time I was 16 years old sounded like this: sex is a beautiful and natural gift from God. It is also nasty and dirty, so we don't talk about it. So save it for the one you love. And I don't think that the church or society said anything else to me about sex that made any sense, that was any less confusing, until I walked through the doors of MCC. So I want to begin tonight by saying how grateful I am for being a part of a church and a part of an extended worldwide family that would be you, where we can talk candidly and honestly and respectfully about every aspect of both spirituality and sexuality. Most of Christianity has implicitly and explicitly insisted that our sexuality is somehow an impediment to our spirituality. And that's not just been for queer folks, that's been for all folks. I'm sure you realize that the Christian church's problem is not with homosexuality, it's with human sexuality. If the church ever got human sexuality right, it wouldn't have a problem with homosexuality. But here we are insisting that these two enemies can actually be reconciled. Here we are saying that we believe that this divided house can be united. And we even say we think we may be the people to do it. And here is why. Because the truth of our lives and our experience bears witness sexuality and spirituality are really two sides of the same coin. That to us, it feels like they inhabit the same country. It feels to us like they come from the same seemingly inexhaustible source. To us, it seems that sex and spirit run on the same energy, and that they demand the same kind of harmony, that together they are the parts of ourselves that urge us outside of ourselves and into relationship. Our sexuality, which certainly includes our capacity for genital sexual activity, but also for love and sensuality and intimacy and affection, urges us out of ourselves and into relationship with each other. While our spirituality, which certainly includes our capacity for religious belief and practice, but also for tolerance and wonder and awe and reverence, urges us outside of ourselves and into relationship with the other. And so together, they urge us to God's intention that we not live in isolation, but that we live in relationship with each other and with the other. What we're saying is that we are trying to recover the sexuality that the church never told us is part of our spirituality. And we're trying to recover the spirituality that nobody ever told us is a part of our sexuality. But we do have a problem here, because the sexuality part of that sexuality and spirituality dyad, excuse me, is probably the most wounded and broken part of our humanness. So much of what we have inherited around human sexuality has been distorted by ignorance and fear and superstition and just downright hypocrisy. And those attitudes and these practices that surround human sexuality have contributed to an inestimable amount of pain and confusion that leads to things like the sexual abuse of children and sexualized violence against women, and to a lesser degree against men, and a refusal to provide accurate and accessible and age-appropriate and sex-positive information to the people who need it the most, and also refusal to listen to the sexual prophets who are among us. And that list just goes on and on. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise to us, because the Christian tradition got really sick around the whole issue of human sexuality very early on. Yves of Chartres, who was a very influential Roman Catholic bishop in the 11th century in France, instructed Christians to abstain from sex on Thursday and Friday in remembrance of Christ's capture and crucifixion, and on Saturday in honor of the Virgin Mary, and on Sunday to commemorate the resurrection, and on Monday to respect the dead. You get the idea of what he was trying to communicate there. At the beginning of the last century, preachers preached against what they called excessive sex, which they defined as more than once every 2 years, and then only for heterosexually married couples, and with and for the purpose of procreation only. Now, a lot of us have got stories. Some of them are funny and some of them are tragic about how we got into this mess. And what happened historically is really rather complicated, but there is a simple way to understand it. First, less than 100 years after Jesus' death, Christianity was almost totally separated from its Jewish roots. And second, most of those early Christians who wrote about sex were deeply influenced by Greek philosophy and culture, which separated the body from the soul and said the body is evil and the soul is good. Plato summed it up like this: the body is an impediment which by its presence prevents the soul from attaining salvation. The historian Vern Bullock says that by the end of the 5th century, Christianity was firmly established as a sex-negative religion. So what do we do about all this brokenness around our sexuality before we take on this great goal of trying to reconcile our sexuality and our spirituality, of bringing body and soul back together again? By the way, I'm not suggesting that our spirituality can't be just as broken as our sexuality. It's just that we happen to be talking tonight about our sexuality. I think a good place to begin is by understanding what Christian scripture means when it talks about salvation. Of course, if you listen to a lot of preachers, you can easily get the idea that we are only important, humans are only important because we have souls that need to be saved. And I think that would be an idea highly offensive to at least one Jew named Jesus, because he was very clear that people aren't important because they have souls. They're important because they are people. And when Christian scripture talks about our being saved, it is talking about our being healed all the way through to wholeness in every aspect of our being. In fact, in Greek, the root word for both salvation and healing is exactly the same word. It means literally to pick up the pieces that are lost and put them back together again, to unite what has been divided, to reconcile what has been separated, to mend what has been broken. To be saved means to be healed all the way through to wholeness in every aspect of our being. Now, the church has had a lot to say to me about saving my soul, but I want my sexuality saved too. I want some sexual salvation and some sexual healing for myself and for all of us. No one ever told us how that was supposed to happen. But when I think about it, one of the things I remember is that the Apostle Paul said, I was saved, I am saved, and I am being saved. And I believe that I started being saved when I started believing that the Word became flesh. But now my body and my sexuality are bearing witness to me that I continue to be saved by believing that the flesh can also become Word. In other words, is it possible that because of all of this sex negative junk that found its way into Christianity, that we miss finding God in the closest, clearest, and most obvious place of all, in our bodies and in our sexuality? After all, we're talking about a God who created us with the need to reach out and touch each other. We're talking about a religion founded on the belief that God chose human flesh as a way of touching us physically. We're talking about a theology founded on the belief that God became human flesh in order to touch us, and that human flesh is the privileged and chosen place where God and humankind meet in the very most important of all of our encounters. Theology that says God actually chose a human body to reveal herself to us. And if all of that sounds like it's just way too much out there somewhere, we're also talking about the only activity where some people ever cry out, "Oh my God," or "Jesus Christ." We're, after all, talking about the God who, in the second chapter of Hosea, said to the nation of Israel, "I love you so much that if you keep being unfaithful to me, I'm going to take you out in the desert, and I'm going to make such tender and passionate love to you that you're not ever going to look at anybody else again, ever." This is a passionate God. This is a God who is sometimes angry, sometimes heartbroken, sometimes jealous, sometimes tender and forgiving, but always, always passionately in love with us. Can flesh become Word? Is there revelation and wisdom and even saving knowledge in these body cells of ours? Can our experience of sexuality help heal us all the way through? Can it help save us? But now we have another problem, because to believe that, we would have to do something that many of us are not very good at. We would have to trust our own experience. I believe that many of us stopped trusting ourselves at a very young age. At a young age, we became aware of feelings, and we thought they were good. They sure felt good to us. They felt natural, and they felt exciting, and they felt important. And then we began to hear from other people that they're not natural, they're unnatural. And not only that, but they're sick and sinful. And we stopped trusting ourselves. Someplace deep inside of us, down at the core, in a place where we make decisions about what's good and bad, in what's right and wrong, something started to unwind. And we stopped trusting ourselves. We started waiting for other people to tell us how to feel and what to believe. We started living from the outside in instead of from the inside out. Remember K.D. Lang saying these words, "I've been outside myself for so long, every feeling I had is almost gone." But what if we could start believing? What if we could start believing right now that there is revelation and there is wisdom and there is even saving knowledge that comes from walking on the earth in these body selves that we are? What if there is sexual salvation for all of us by being loved and loving people whose bodies are the same as ours, as well as being loved by bodies that are different from ours? I believe that this is true and possible for all of us. But I want to say specifically to my LGBTQ sisters and brothers, I believe that our unique experience in this world means that we know some things. We have been taught some things by that experience, some things that go down to the bone in us. I believe we know things about relationships and responsibility, about intimacy and mutuality. I believe we know things about eroticizing equality in relationships, about trust and faithfulness, and things about the sacredness of pleasure. And it feels to me like we are just beginning to trust ourselves enough to begin talking about our own truths, to acknowledge that this truth and experience has the power to heal us all the way through to wholeness. And for all of us, that we are being saved because the Word became flesh and because the flesh is becoming Word. Joby?
Joe, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm using a much smaller screen tonight, as you can imagine, and I couldn't find you. I couldn't find where you were. So we're gonna head into breakout rooms now. And Cheryl, I think you probably have everything all set up. Just want to remind you again. Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna go ahead and offer this up and let you know what we're doing. And we sent these questions to you kind of as pre-work for you to do a little bit of thinking ahead of time. And what we would like to do is for you to spend about 5 minutes sharing those earliest messages that you received about sex and sexuality. Now, once again, we're very careful here. Our language is very intentional. We're not asking you about memories, to remember memories and share those. We're asking you to share messages that you got, about sexuality as you were going along through your life. Some of this might have been a long time ago. And then we'd like you to spend about 5 minutes trying to share how those earliest messages about sex and sexuality, how did they influence the development of your personal sexuality? Maybe about 5 minutes right there. And our last question that brings this reintegration together, if you could think how those earliest messages about sex and sexuality influence the development of your personal spirituality. All right. So therefore, you're going to need a little bit of a timer. We're going to always encourage you to make sure there's room for everybody in your small group to share. And also, when we come out, if we have any kind of debrief, especially tonight, we just want to remind you, you can share what you shared, but it's not really your place to share what somebody else in your group shared. Okay? If you want to share what your group talked about, you use really wonderful terms like we said this. One of our folks mentioned this, and just a little bit of boundaries, right? Just making sure that we share what we want to share. And again, as you go into and enjoy this time together in your small groups, just remember that you indeed have a water line and you are in charge of it. All right? If you lower it to thoughts, if you lower it to feelings, maybe even some beliefs and values, that is up to you. And same thing if you kind of keep it raised up because you want to be a little careful. What did you say last week, Lily? Kate said you keep it zipped up. Okay, if you want to keep yourself zipped up, okay. And once again, we just encourage you to be a part of that conversation. We're going to put you into the breakouts for about 15 minutes, unless there are any questions at all. I'm going to put you in big screen. Any questions at all? We've been doing this for 4 weeks now, so you are obviously well trained. Look at this, fantastic. Okay, then Cheryl, send them away. Give them 14 minutes with a 1-minute warning. And as usual, if you watch your screen, Cheryl will send a little message in there saying 10 minutes left, 5 minutes left. And then you'll come on back. Have a wonderful conversation.
And Joe will be the recording.
I'm going to stop the recording for a moment. Thanks very much for that reminder. Put it on pause.
Recording, Joby.
Everyone is coming back.
Yay!
Hello.
But that is interesting how there's so much to learn.
I hope those were fabulous conversations. Ken, they are once again all yours, my friend.
We got everybody back. Good. Welcome back, everyone. Kristen, I wonder if you'd be willing to take just a moment and share with us about your first messages around sexuality and how you feel like that has influenced the development of your own personal sexuality.
We need to mute some microphones.
Yeah, we do. Cheryl, I think you have to do that as the host.
Are we okay?
I think so. Hi,
All
Chris.
right.
Thank
Well,
you.
I'll thank you for the advance warning because it let me be extra thoughtful with these questions. And my early messages, you could not have summed it up better, Ken. It was sex is a beautiful thing. It's dirty. Don't talk about it. Save it for the one you love. Like I said to the group, I think my mom got the same brochure you did because that was the lesson in a nutshell right there. And then it was don't talk about it. It was boys are not allowed in your room from a very young age, but no explanation of why they weren't allowed into my room. It was dress appropriately because boys are bad. No explanation of what they would actually do, just that they would do bad things if I didn't dress correctly for things. And then as I shared with the group growing up older, and when my mother found out that I was sexually active, she told me she was disappointed in the path of life I'd chosen. Those were her exact words. Beyond that, we just don't talk about it. We don't talk about it even now. We didn't talk about it when I was married and thinking about divorce. The conversation was, well, don't get pregnant if you're not going to stay married. And that was the end of it. So realizing and thinking about this more, I still don't talk about it. I will love a good body dirty joke, but I don't talk about sex or sexuality in a meaningful way with people because nobody has ever talked to me about it. And whoop, water line dropping. Give me a second here. Woo, okay. But yeah, and then when it comes to spirituality, several of the people that I was just in the group, we just talked about how, God was a man, and most of the priests and people we were introduced to early on were men. But otherwise there weren't lessons about it. There was a lot of lessons about what's wrong with sex, but I don't remember any messages about how to do it right. And so I know some people shared that they did get some lessons, and that's great, but I don't think anyone's told me yet how to do that right. So we'll see. We'll see what what more comes out of this.
Yeah. Thank you. I think, when we were talking about this, we realized a couple of things. One is that there's a real generational issue here, in terms of where the messages come from. We probably are grouped into three different groups. People who are as old as I am, say over 70, our messages came from one place. And then there's a group of people whose messages came from another. And then the youngest group of people, who have access to the internet, then everything just blew up, in terms of information. That did not mean it was accurate. It just meant that it was there, and that people were being exposed to it all the time. The other thing that's really clear is the difference in the way males and females are sociosexualized, the information that we are given. I wonder if any of the men would be willing to talk about the messages that you got in comparison to Kristen's. Would anybody be willing to do that? I can't see everybody, so.
I'm looking for a hand going up, Ken.
Okay.
And so far I got crickets over here.
Oh, I just wanted to comment that
Chris.
Nathan said something. He was given a James Dobson book for teens. So I thought that was interesting in the chat.
There you go, Nathan and Chris. You can go, one of you guys just go ahead and unmute. Chris, thanks, Nathan.
Yeah. Well, as I shared in our group, really there was nothing said about sexuality in my being a PK, even with the United Methodist preacher dad. There was absolutely nothing ever said to me. But years later, I was shocked and amazed to find out that there was plenty said to my sister about how to dress, how to act, to be modest, and et cetera and so forth. And we grew up basically in the late 70s. So I was just amazed as there was a completely different standard, because nothing was ever said to me. And of course, they didn't have to worry about me anyway, but, and she got the lecture.
Well, there's one of the myths about this is that boys know what to do. Boys know. And girls have to be told what to do, which is just much more, of a double standard. But, I was the pastor of Southern Baptist churches for a number of years. And I can tell you from the number of heterosexually married women who came to me that boys don't know what to do. That men had no idea what female anatomy was about or what female physiology was about. And so that's the ignorance part of this. There's the misinformation part, and then there's the ignorance part, which leads, last year there was a national survey. I'll think of the name of it in a minute. And it was the largest survey around human sexuality that's been done in over 60 years. And one of the areas that was covered was sexual dysfunction in adults, being sexually dysfunctional, unable to perform sexually. And what the statistics that came out of that survey led the people who were doing it to say that sexual dysfunction is a major national health crisis. That there are so many people, who don't know anything about what they're doing, that sex, instead of being a pleasurable thing and a way of deepening relationships, is just a subject of frustration in many people's lives. I wonder if anybody else that just has anything you'd like to add to this discussion.
I'm looking for a hand up, Ken. Actually, Jim's got his hand up. Jim?
Okay.
Yeah, I did not share this in my group, and you all will not know my cousin, so it's a very short story, I promise. We were at a family gathering, and this whole thing kind of turned upside down. This cousin was from another state. I'm blind, and it turned out she asked my cousin, who was a year younger than me, asked my sister how I dealt with my monthly. My phone started talking. Sorry. How I dealt with my monthly. Well, obviously that opened a lot of the adults' eyes to a lot of things. We were just 17, 18, but there was more. Obviously, she didn't know about boys and girls that much, but she didn't know, about, how blind people do jack, which is kind of a shock. But the sad part is watching her through life, because her parents, neither one, my uncle or my aunt, never really felt comfortable talking to her. They just shipped her off to boarding schools where she really never learned anything. So she has awkward relationships. I noticed she wanted to be a mom, so she's a mom, which is great for her, but she never really developed healthy relationships with men or women, or a healthy romantic. And I feel bad for her, because she's now almost 50 and she's tried to make something out of the mess, but it's sad, so yeah, I got asked how I dealt with my monthly.
Thank you, Jim. One of the things we know is that doctors and sex therapists can help treat adult sexual dysfunction, but parents can actually prevent it by creating a healthier atmosphere around sexuality. Let me tell you just a really brief, wonderful story. I think I have permission to tell this. Some of you know Judy Longman, who has been a member of MCC for many, many years, very active. And one time when I was the pastor of MCC in North Hollywood, California, and Judy was one of our team leaders, we were having a meeting at her house, and she had a little boy who at that time was 5 years old, and he had a teddy bear, and there were about 15 of us sitting in a circle in her living room, and he came in and laid the teddy bear down on the floor, and then he laid down on top of the teddy bear and started grinding, humping the teddy bear in a very provocative little motion. And Judy said to him, "Honey, that's not something we do in public. That's something we do in private. So if you want to continue doing that, go back to your room and do that by yourself. If you want to stay here with us, then you need to stop doing that." And I thought, that will be a healthy child, sexually, to have that kind of understanding and information, that kind of transparency and openness, within the family. And I'm honestly, I meet very, very few people who can say that they really grew up with anything approaching health around the whole subject of body imagery, and human sexuality. Okay, so it's about time for us to move on into this next section. I have one more just short thing I want to share with you before ending tonight. I want to leave you with two more ideas, just two more things for us to think about, and things that maybe we can even go deeper into at some point in the future. First of all, when we commit ourselves individually and as communities to reconcile sexuality and spirituality, what we are doing is recovering our own tradition. What we're trying to do is get back to where we started. We're not changing any of our truths. We're not altering any of our values. We're really trying to get back to reclaim where we started. Joby, if you'll put up that T.S. Eliot slide. This is a wonderful little, very short statement by T.S. Eliot. He said, "And the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time."
Yes.
Thank you, Joe. So we have already noted that the Christian tradition got very sick very early around the subject of human sexuality, but it did not begin that way. So we are committed to healing this brokenness by getting back to where we started. And the truth is that through the Hebrew scriptures' deep commitment to the goodness of all creation, and through Christian scriptures' central focus on human flesh being the place that God chose to meet us, we really should and could have a very strong bias toward a very positive, very sex positive kind of theology. Unfortunately, there are today a lot of theologians and biblical scholars and historians which are challenging a lot of those old assumptions, and the things that we were taught are not taught, and reaching some different conclusions. One of the conclusions they are reaching, that we're reading a lot about now, one of the most welcome one, is that our oldest faith stories actually show men and women created equal and with mutuality as the goal of human sexual activity. A close reading of the Song of Songs reveals that the woman in that story initiates sex more than the man does, and that sex is equally pleasurable and rewarding for her. Another wonderful conclusion for us is that biblical scholarship is just almost unanimous today that the Bible does not condemn homosexuality as we know it. The best Hebrew and Greek scholars in the world all agree that there's not one single word in either of those languages in the Bible that can be translated as homosexual or homosexuality. For example, in the Oxford Annotated Edition of the New RSV version of the Bible, there is a footnote under the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the footnote says, though disapproval of male homosexual rape is assumed here, the primary point of this text is how this threat by the townspeople violates the value of hospitality. And another one of the footnotes says, the Greek words that have always been associated with homosexuality in Christian scripture were mistranslated and have nothing to do with homosexuality. And one last wonderful kind of conclusion is that unlike the institutional church, God actually cares more about the quality of our relationships than about the frequency of our genital sexual activity or who we are doing it with. For example, quoting Romans 13:8, which says, the one who loves another has fulfilled the law, is much more relevant today than quoting all of those old ancient laws that have absolutely no relevance in the 21st century. So now we know the influences that have shaped the legacy that we have inherited around sexuality and spirituality. We can trace the origins of those influences that shaped our beliefs and practices. And here's the point. If we want to, we can reevaluate all of that legacy, and we can change it if we want to. For the second idea I would like to leave with you, let's begin by acknowledging that just about every religious institution of any kind that has ever existed has created some kind of theology of sexuality. The way you do that is you begin with your beliefs about the nature of God, and you use those to shape the purposes and possibilities, potential of human sexuality. We know that the people who did that for Christianity believed that God was passionless, that God was unfeeling, that God was remote. They believed that God's only concern was about getting our souls saved. Their beliefs about God were very limited. And so when they theologized sex with those beliefs, of course, they came out with very limited ideas about sex, which, by the way, always condemned almost all of us. So those who created our legacy theologized sexuality with their understanding of God. And we know what we get when we do that. What I want us to imagine is how different it might be if instead of theologizing sex, we sexualized theology. Instead of just letting what we believe about God shape what we believe about human sexuality, what if we also let what we know now about sex shape our understanding of God? Let's look at just one example of what might happen if we did that. Throughout most of history, the history of Christianity, Orthodox Christian theology has insisted that sex is a tainted but necessary part of our humanness, that it is the result of the fall of humankind in the Garden of Eden, and it is a constant reminder of original sin. So it is predictable that when you theologize sex with those beliefs, you conclude that God would approve of sex primarily or only for the purpose of procreation. The resulting theology of sexuality would condemn all sexual activity that does not lead to procreation. This actually led St. Thomas Aquinas to insist that masturbation is a much greater sin than rape. Because, he said, at least with rape, you have the possibility of procreation. But what if we began differently? What if we began with what we, after learning to trust our experience of our own sexuality, have concluded? Haven't we concluded that our sexuality is not a result of original sin, but that it is in fact a part of the sacred in us, that it is in fact one of the ways in which we are literally created in the image of God? What if we began by remembering that joyous and uninhibited and sensual sexuality that we discovered in the Song of Songs, and by remembering the God who wanted to take Israel out and make tender, passionate love in the desert, the God who chose to be clothed in human flesh? What if instead of theologizing sex, we sexualize theology? First of all, we might end up with a God we could believe in and a God that we could love, but we definitely would end up with an understanding of the potentials and purposes of human sexuality that would be consistent with the values of our faith story at its very beginning. Instead of having a theology of sexuality, we would have a sexual theology in which God delights in and approves of all consenting sexual expression, not just for procreation, but also for recreation and for deepening and enriching our relationships. That would be the beginning of finding our way back to where we began and knowing the place for the first time.
Sexualizing
Toby?
theology. That's
Ken,
good.
thank you so very, very much. I think all I can ask for right now is that you just unmute yourselves and give Ken some love. My goodness. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
Ken.
Thank you. COVID's over. Can we book you?
We've always been chatting, you know. I think, Ken, from the very first time we heard some of this in that sermon on the ship at the MCC leadership cruise, God knows how many years ago, you know, probably a couple decades, that it shifted something in Cheryl and I at that moment that has only gotten more seasoned. You've become more passionate and even stronger in your message. And when you all were in the breakout room, Lily just said to Ken, just don't ever stop. Just don't ever stop doing what you do, Ken. You know, it's a healing that we need in the world. It's a healing that we need individually. It's a healing that we need in the church. My goodness. Thank you, my friend. What an honor to be with you tonight and to hear this done by you, because none of us, except your first pilot, your classes in Austin years and years and years ago, ever got to hear you teach this class. So Ken, thank you. Thank you for years and years of CLMer. So we appreciate it. So my friends, I alluded a little bit to a change of the finish to tonight, and I want to quickly tee up what we have coming up. And next week, as many of you know, it is Sanctuary Seder. And what's really quite amazing about this is about a year ago is when we were getting ready for our Seder. I think it was our third Seder at Sanctuary, which we did face to face. belly to belly, had a wonderful, great meal right after COVID hit. And we're like, what should we do? So we crazily, we all looked at the pictures last week. We were prepping for this. We went online and we had no idea what we were doing. I will be very honest with you. And it still worked. We had a wonderful Seder evening. And so we invite all of you next week. It'll go again about an hour and a half though. So next week, right here, same time, same station, same Zoom channel, same password. Look to your email midweek. And if you'd like to come, I think we also agreed that we would send out our sanctuary, our Haggadah that we have written. It's our sanctuary Haggadah, and we will have readers and you can follow along in your own Haggadah that night. So that is happening next Tuesday, right here, last week of March. And in April, normally the last week of the month is when we have our book conversation. So Seder is punting our March book conversation to the first week of April. So April 6th, Cheryl will host, as she magically does, Care of the Soul, which you had a couple excerpts from in the last month to read. And Care of the Soul is one of the books that was a source book for CLM. And obviously here for A Taste of Self. So give that a good read. I know Cheryl says it's not necessarily an easy read, but enjoy that. We'll have a great conversation. April 13th, Barb Crabtree is going to pull out some amazing pictures of her trip to Egypt and the stories that she shared. She's given this, I'm trying to think, in the church, what do they used to call that when you went to church or your parents went to church and the missionaries came back and gave, what was that called? Jane Ann, come on, what was the name of that thing? You went and you watched and they did slides. They put the little pictures in, the
Mission Sunday.
there you go. Thanks, Nathan.
Well, it was a missions conference. We used to have a missions conference.
Southern Baptist, it was Lottie Moon.
Lottie Moon.
What are you saying?
Lottie Moon.
Anyway,
Southern Baptist, it was Lottie Moon.
Lottie Moon. My friends, come.
Lottie Moon, who every Southern Baptist knows, except most people don't know that Lottie Moon was a lesbian, that she had a lover for about 45 years.
Well, there you go.
All right. All right.
So anyway, come on on the second week of April, Barb's got just some amazing shots of her trip to Egypt and some great stories to go along. So a nice light evening. We've been a little deep this month, so we thought that would be a great thing to put in. And then also,
Toby?
Pardon? I got a question.
No, I have in my trip to Egypt, I have not bought a plastic bottle since I returned from Egypt in 2016. And I have a picture of a camel sitting in piles of plastic bottles on the main street of Cairo.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, come on and enjoy and share. You'll probably have some stories to share as well, Jane Ann.
Yeah. Jane Ann, I've got some great camel pictures.
Yes, she does. So a new feature at Sanctuary Online is something called Meet the Artist. And we're going to occasionally pull up an artist of any different kinds of works. But Edie Disler, our very own Edie from Austin, Texas, and a welcome visitor with her and her kids out at Sanctuary. Edie works in metals, and I will tell you she works in teeny metals, and she works in gigantic metals. So we're really excited. I think, Cheryl, are you doing the interview?
I'm gonna do the interview, and it's and she has huge metallic sculptures that she does. She creates for, and takes people ask her to do certain things. So she's got some really fabulous stuff,
different work. So that'll be a really nice first tee off of a new feature at Sanctuary Online. And then of course, our last week of the month is our April book conversation. And that book that we're doing April 27th is The Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd. All right. Now, I shared a minute ago that I was when I opened up tonight, that we were going to do the ending a little bit different tonight. Okay. So normally we would tee up our paper body activity right now and we would play the music. And a few of you go off camera to do that, which is fine. But tonight, sometimes you leave that way. You kind of go off camera and then you exit out while the rest of us hang around for the after party, the after conversation, which I'm sure tonight will be quite interesting. I'm just saying. And anyway, tonight we're going to do this. We're going to tee up. We've got a little closing that the team is going to do for you next. Then we're going to tee up the paper body activity with the song. And then I'm going to ask you to stay on and maybe come back on your cameras after that. So we close, Ken and the team will close this session, session 4 of A Taste of Self. Then we'll come back on and we'll close the entirety of the 4 sessions. Okay, so a little bit different, and we're still doing pretty good for time. So my final push to you is when Ken introduces the paper body activity with the song, I'm going to encourage you to be on mute. God bless you. But I want you to sing the words. I can't tell you how many times when we would close self as the 6th session, fabulous potluck, a big activity, but we would stand in a circle, back when you could do that. We would hold hands, back when you could do that. And the people would sing the song. There's 5 verses, 5, the same time, 5 stanzas, and they would sing to each other. And I just can't even tell you that without getting chill bumps all up my arms on the back of my neck. And what was really cool was the facilitators would have taken the paper bodies with all the drawings and the markings from 6 weeks of classes, and we would roll those up in a scroll and put a beautiful ribbon on them. And as the people sang the song to each other in a circle and around, the facilitators would go back and hand each person, their own paper body, kind of as a graduation certificate. So we can't do all that with you in a virtual world, but we can ask you to sing. And I'm going to ask you to sing the song to yourself and to sing the song to the folks that you see on your screen. Again, we'll all be on mute, so it'll sound wonderful. And it does change things when you put those words in your mouth and when you speak those words into the universe. So I'm going to just a little bit of an encouragement there tonight. Ken, they are yours, my friend, to finish things off.
You're breaking up to me, Joey. I'm having a lot of trouble hearing you. So I may not have a lot of bandwidth left here. So here we go. Okay. So after reading the excerpt from Toni Morrison's Beloved, we asked you to journal about what you thought was the main message of Baby Suggs Holy's sermon to her people in the clearing. And of course, there are a lot of answers for that. And one of them certainly is that she was telling her people that they had to reclaim their own bodies with the sensual and sexual pleasure that their bodies were capable of. She said, you got to reclaim them from those yonder who do not love your body. You got to love your body even when other people hate your body. Remember the words of William Blake tonight. And priests in black gowns were making their rounds and binding with briars my joys and desires. So in a moment, we're going to ask you to wet your finger from your own mouth and anoint your paper body representing your physical body in any way you want to indicate reclaiming it along with your spiritual body and your energetic body and your emotional body to celebrate you as a real full and complete self. But before that, the 4 facilitators of these last 4 weeks would like for you to hear a few of Baby Suggs Holy's words just one more time.
Here, in this here place, we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet and grass. Love it hard.
Love your hands, love them, raise them up and kiss them, touch others with them.
This is flesh I'm talking about here. Flesh that needs to be loved. Feet that need to rest and to dance. Backs that need support.
Love it. Love it. And the beat and the beating heart, love that too. More than eyes or feet, more than your life-holding womb and your life-giving private parts. Hear me now. Love your heart, for this is the prize. So because of who we are and the moment in history in which we are living, it's almost impossible that our sexuality has not been bruised and broken, maybe even condemned, ignored, feared, denied by shame and ignorance and superstition. But we believe that when God promised to heal us all the way through to wholeness, that included our sexuality. So we celebrate this healing tonight. We welcome our sexuality as a beautiful part of the selves that we are rediscovering. And now we invite you to wet your finger with your own mouth and anoint your paper body as the music plays.
This will take about 5 minutes. And then again, please come on camera so we can close our entire Lenten journey together.
You were anything less than beautiful. How could anyone? And whole. How could anyone fail to notice that your loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected to my soul. How could I
Well, thank you, my friends. And so it is. It's time to close our Lenten journey, our Creating a Life That Matters journey, and our online Taste of Self journey. And first, I really have to thank our team. We are a group of courageous people who have simply been blessed to invite hundreds and thousands of people into this conversational journey experienced in community, and who love, love, love CLM. And that love comes from the fact that we just have been able to see it do its work over and over and over. So Cheryl and Barb, Terry and Lily and Ken, if I can say those words without crying, thank you. Thank you each for believing that if we try and if we trust, this CLM can be repackaged, redesigned, updated, dear God, for an online delivery, and that she can then bolt over the brick and mortar that has contained her and restrained her from getting to all those who would benefit from this intentional conversation. So thank you, my friends. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. You can unmute, and there's been many hours and a few stressors of making this thing happen. Terry, you are shaking your head a little too vigorously, my friend. Oh, and thanks to each of you, those of you who've joined us on this Lenten journey. You have shown up. You've encouraged us. You've given us some feedback. And trust me, we're going to reach out again shortly to see if you have even more thoughts and suggestions from your side of the camera. So we will be reaching out with some requests for feedback, just straight feedback, maybe for participation in some focus groups. But thank you so very much. It's been a crazy blessing, and you have challenged us with this kind of number to put you into breakouts, to bring you back, to ask you questions, to be nervous about your answers. So thank you. You've been wonderful. We also need to lift up the thousands of CLM graduates, the hundreds of facilitators that are out there who have walked the CLM journey for the last 17 years. So they have come before us, and we stand on their shoulders as we always do. Just really, again, appreciating those folks who have proven to us that this conversation is life-giving and transformational. So tonight we say thank you. We say bless you. We encourage you to stay safe out there in a yet continuing to change world, and stay on the lookout for the entirety of CLM coming online this fall, or maybe even in early 2020. Thank you, my friends. It has been a blessing to be a part of you and to be a part of this circle. We appreciate you. And as always, we will stay open for the next half hour. The class is officially over. I will go ahead and stop the recording here in just a moment. But we've been enjoying staying open for about 30 more minutes till the top of the hour. And we have had some, let me just say, very interesting conversations. So great. Come on by, have a chat. It's just kind of like hanging out in the classroom after the class is over. So I'm going to close our conversation, close our recording here, and wrap this. Bless you all. Thank you again so much for being a part of this with us.